Hello, everybody. You're listening to Burnout Meets Thriving,
where we bring our organizational background, lived experience, and hot takes about modern day workplace culture.
We're your hosts. I'm Farra.
And Miriam.
And we're your new workplace revolution buddies. You can also think of us as guides, to help building your career and also to help build a workplace worth waking up for.
And today we're starting our very first episode of Burnout Meets Thriving. So hello, beautiful people. I just want to welcome you in to our very first episode where we're going to talk about psychological safety. But before we get into it, I'm going to introduce ourselves. I'm Miriam, founder of Thriving Human.
I'm Farra, founder of the Burnout Support Society. And together we make Burnout Meets Thriving. If you're tired of all those played out horrible rules in the workplace, if you're tired of being told we've always done it this way, or we can't change that here. If you feel like your personality has to be left at the door, you're in the right place. Welcome. Come on in.
And we're happy you're here. So as mentioned, today we're going to talk about psychological safety. And this is our first episode and a topic that Farra and I both really enjoy talking about, because without psychological safety at work, one will not thrive, the workplace will not thrive, and it's how a lot of people experience burnout, in addition to a lot of other things, which our resident expert in burnout, Farra here, will tell us. But psychological safety, we're going to talk to you guys about this and from like a research standpoint, and then how it plays out in the actual workplace. So this is a topic that is trending, even though it's been around for 20 years. We see it on LinkedIn, we see it on BuzzFeed, we see it on Harvard Business Review. And while psychological safety may seem like a new topic or a new thing that everyone is now talking about, it's actually been talked about and researched for more than 20 years now. And
that's a long time.
It is a long time. It goes to show how much it takes for like things that are studied and understood in the educational space, and how long it takes it to make to the actual like lived experience space. And then when it comes to ideas for psychological safety, and I'm sure that y'all could resonate with this happening, is if there's no psychological safety at work, a lot of ideas will die, will not come to flourish. Your supervisors, your boss, your manager, if there's no psychological safety in the workplace, innovation will not flourish. It will die back. It will be a place that a lot of people leave, experience high turnover, high attrition. And so we're going to get into a little of the mechanics of why that happens by explaining to y'all what psychological safety is and how it impacts these things in the workplace.
What even is psychological safety? It is a bit of a buzz term. A lot of people are talking about it and not a lot of people are practicing it. And, we need more people practicing it. So I guess for me, psychological safety is when I feel like I can bring my whole self to work, when I don't have to leave the human aspects of myself at the door, when I can share freely with my coworkers and, chat with my supervisor and bring them ideas, so they don't go and die.
That is the title of this podcast show.
Yeah. But as Miriam said, people have been talking about this for over 20 years. But for some reason, we had to have a Harvard professor, her name is Amy Edmondson, really bring it into our current cultural zeitgeist. And she defines it as the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, and even mistakes, because like I said, we are human. We're going to make a mistake at some point. And if you don't have the trust in your coworkers, in your
Mhm.
management to admit to a mistake, that could be catastrophic depending on your industry. You know, like if
Mhm.
you're a mechanic, if you're, working on the floor at a warehouse, you make a tiny mistake and you don't feel like you can tell somebody about it, that could cost somebody's life. So
Mhm.
psychological safety is so important. But let's talk a little bit about how it's misunderstood. Um, as I said, it's getting a bad rap. Politics are weird these days. It's like empathy. No, like that's not what we're about. That's not what you came here for, and that's not what we're gonna give you. Um, Toxic positivity. That's not psychological safety. Psychological safety is when you can actually speak freely about things that may appear to be negative, because not all negative things are unproductive in the workplace. We have to face up and take accountability.
I think one of the things that stands out to me more about psychological safety, as you were like, explaining it and defining it, is the fear based aspect, right? Which is a psychological phenomena that I find fascinating, where if there is no psychological safety, if someone is afraid to bring up a mistake, or if someone is afraid to not share their ideas, that's very much a fear based response, right? And
Definitely.
that's one of the interesting things that I find when I read about psychological safety is how much fear and behavior is embedded into culture in the workplace, and how it's not really talked about, right? It's just kind of normalized to have this fear response to a supervisor, to a team, to, if I think your example of the mechanic, where lives can be at stake, but that person, that individual is fearing for their life. If I speak up for myself here, if I admit my mistake, I may lose my job.
Like Ocean Gate,
Uh, uh,
soon to come.
and that is all sorts of problematic. There's so many
Uh-huh.
examples for that, right? So let's make it a little more real. You're in a meeting and you've got an idea. So just picture yourself, your team meeting, your department meeting, and you have an idea. It's something that other industries are doing. There's good data out there that shows like, hey, this is actually like a good innovative idea that can bring in money, that can optimize some stuff. And you're thinking about bringing it up. What is going on in your head? How are you feeling in your body? And this is where I'm going to bring a little bit of embodiment practice so that we can help people connect their psyche with their
Super
body
important.
and their somatics. As we're sitting in this meeting, what are you feeling in your body? Is your heart racing? Do you have a knot in your throat? Is your mind racing? Are you sweating? Are you getting really nervous about bringing up this idea? If you are, those are probably signs that your environment is not psychologically safe, because all of your body signals are telling you, hey, I'm very nervous right now. Some of us might go into, actually, I feel like I'm in danger. And that's when we cross over into the trauma, right? The trauma responses that are experienced at work, which is also very fascinating. But it all stems down to like psychological safety, right?
Oh yeah, truly. And like honestly, if you really want to get real sciencey about it, it really
Let's
all boils
do.
down to the amygdala.
Tell us about the
It really,
amygdala.
yeah. That's that's our fear, our fight, our flight, our fawn response. The limbic cortex is truly where it all goes down, and it happens across mammals. And I think that's really neat. So when we think about it in that way from an evolutionary standpoint, fear is good. It helps us stay safe in environments, but we have evolved a bit, right? Like we have different environments. We're not, hunting and foraging and needing to have that that healthy fear. So really, like, psychological safety is, at least if you're a leader, is providing the space for your employees to shed that fear,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm. And if we're going back to that example, you know, some of the repercussions or some of that fear-based response that might be happening, you know, if your body is telling you those signals, what might be going on cognitively is that you're fearing negative consequences. You're fearing that, you know, they're going to think poorly, negatively, that, you know, someone's going to bite your head off, someone's going to yell at you, someone's going to say your idea is stupid. Or maybe your boss is going to think that you're going over their head because you didn't bring it up to them first. How many of us have had those kind of bosses? Right?
Too
That
many to count.
we didn't tell them ahead of time, so they think that we're going over their head instead of having like an open space where we can actually dialogue, right? Another aspect of psychological safety is being able to have dialogue, conversation, good or bad, right? It's building that cultural space where there's comfort, no fear, for sparring, for having difficult conversations, right? Because through conflict is also where we can get through breakthroughs for optimization, innovation, whatever.
It's where we grow.
Mm-hmm. And psychological safety detracts all of that, right? These are all the bad signals when we're thinking about psychologically unsafe environments. And if we're thinking about psychologically safe environment, the opposite of that, what you might experience is, you know, that same situation where you are in a team meeting, department meeting, and you want to bring something up and you actually feel confident. You know, you feel like you can raise your hand, you feel like you can take a seat at the table and bring up your idea, and you don't fear for the repercussions or negative repercussions that might come from bringing up your thought or your opinion or your idea. And so some things that might be going on through your head is, you know, I can share this idea, I'm not going to be embarrassed, you don't feel like I'm going to be humiliated, or you don't feel like you're going to be punished. You trust, Farra talked about this, there's a level of trust, right? You trust that your idea will be genuinely heard and considered. Huge difference, right? Big difference.
It should be the standard, truly.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that one day it will become the standard in workplaces. And especially with the adoption of AI, we need to have more human trust in organizations, so that we can use these tools better, right? So that we can collaborate, so that we can identify gaps, you know, like that doesn't come from a machine. That comes from humans talking to each other, exchanging ideas, and coming up with new innovative products.
Mm-hmm. Or even, you know, bottlenecks or problems that your team is experiencing, or you yourself, right? Maybe you have a tough workload and maybe you're behind on something because, hey, you're human and things can be happening in your life. And you may want to bring up to your supervisor, like, I'm overwhelmed or I'm behind. I would really need some help. Can someone help catch me up? There's so many things that I think we go through when it comes to being behind, feeling so much shame and possible embarrassment of speaking up, that all signals like bad psychological safety, because you're just kind of being hyper vigilant about your own behavior and performance. And when we think about that, like, organizations are all structured around performance, right? Like, somebody's assessing you to some degree. And so there's a lot of fear. And it's, I think, being amplified right now with the fact that, like, we see so many layoffs and so many restructuring because of AI that a lot of people
restructuring
are afraid. We're going to talk about that, right?
What a buzzword.
Restructuring because of AI and because of budget and blah, blah, blah. But then that has so many workers on their toes. And so when it comes to minding our, you know, health and safety, at work, I think we're like holding back, or a lot of people are holding back. And also the fact that psychological safety is not talked about enough, right? It's not normalized. Like, I don't know if I had any supervisors or leaders who ever talked about psychological safety or really knew about it. I think,
Same.
and that's kind of mind blowing, right? I think I really discovered it. I think I read it before going into my organizational leadership masters, but um in that it's where I wrote my capstone project, right, is like psychological safety for who, which we I'll be excited to talk about to y'all, and Farah and I have some exciting things to explore more around psychological safety. But we're going to go into a little more of the foundational stuff today and continue explaining what it is so that you as a worker can be empowered with yourself. At least, it starts with us. It can start with us. Leaders do have huge power around this, right? But you yourself as the employee can start to advocate for it. And we would very much like to promote you self-advocating, and also leaders who might be listening to this to advocate for more psychological safety in their workplace. So without further ado, I think we can get into, psychological safety and culture.
Psychological safety definitely always starts with culture, right? Like, we were always talking about top down. This is absolutely one of those moments where top down is super duper important. We need to have our leaders cultivating an environment where, I know this is kind of a naughty word now, diversity is encouraged and actually respected and things like that. When you have a leader who is, I mean, not the antichrist, but a leader who is like kind of awful, and doesn't see people as people. They tend to shuffle them around like pawns. Um, that that does not create an environment of psychological safety. Honestly, I can think of a current thing that's happened, where I'm sure the workers there do not feel psychologically safe. So, Klarna, at the top of this year, they went all in on AI, right? So they went all in, and then they cut their entire customer service department. Yeah, that's awful, right? Well, guess what? It is what, September?
Mm-hmm.
They had to backtrack that.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't take very long, in my opinion. Was it like a couple of quarters in a
Mm-hmm.
fiscal year?
Mm-hmm.
And in that backtracking, they had to restructure the organization once again and shuffle people around out of the jobs in which they, signed a contract. This is what I'm doing here. So
Mm-hmm.
they're taking people out of engineering, marketing, and even the law department, which is just blowing my mind, and making them do customer service simply because they decided to over leverage themselves in AI. And so all I can really think about are the workers
Mm-hmm.
that now have to do customer service. Like, have you met an engineer? Like, I mean, I have a lot of engineers in my life. My dad was an engineer. I can't imagine an engineer doing customer service. No offense to the social engineers out there, but like, that's kind of a big ask, right? Like, and on top of that, role clarity, where is that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You need role clarity to have psychological safety in an
Mm-hmm.
organization. And if you're constantly shuffling people around, from department to department, you're like trying to be agile without explaining things to people as it occurs.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing your job as a leader.
Nope. Nope.
Actually, what you're doing is you are orchestrating
Yep.
chaos
Mm-hmm.
on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Say that louder for the people in the back. Yeah.
Are.
One of
Because
the
you know better. You have the tools, right?
Yeah, one of the things that came up when you were sharing that is initially like a pendulum, because organizations tend to like move the pendulum over and over in very short time frames, and it's, we'll get into change management in the future, but these are people, these are humans that when we think about culture and organizations, we're talking about norms, what we're used to, habits, what folks experience as they're going in and day out for their jobs. And then someone at the top decides, now we're going to do this. And they fling the pendulum. And now the whole organization needs to go one way and then another way. And then as you shared a little more, I felt whiplash.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say nauseous because that's
It is
that's what I got.
nauseous, right? Well, I mean,
Yeah.
whiplash can cause nausea
So true.
because initially, and depending on how organizations do these rollouts of restructuring and how much they communicate or not communicate to all levels of the organization, you can experience a pendulum if you're lucky, a little slower. Still, there's gonna be ebbs and flows within organizations, but that whiplash, I feel, is what I was more used to in my job experience of getting information last minute and all of a sudden having to organize that chaos. I have a moniker where I used to kind of joke that I was, chief organizer of chaos or chief chaos organizer because I was just really good at it. But that's what came up when you were sharing about psychological safety and culture and Klarna.
Yeah, Klarna. So wild. Actually, I have heard someone in a leadership role use the term, it's like herding cats, And I'm like, why? Why? It doesn't have to be that way.
It does not.
It doesn't. If there's trust, if there's communication, clear and continuous communication,
And
then you have psychological safety.
Yeah, and that's where our professions come in, right? Industrial organizational psychology, organizational leadership. That's what I studied, and it's all about helping organizations like better lead their their teams, their work, their strategies. And IO is big crossover, right? You want to tell us about IO and your profession and how it helps with psychological safety?
Oh, wow. IO. For those out there who don't even know what the I and the O stand for, let me tell you. The I stands for industrial, the O stands for organizational. So, industrial and organizational psychology. And honestly, that title is kind of unique to the US. In other areas of the world, they call it occupational psychology, which makes way more sense. But it's the American way to celebrate the industry. So altogether, what an IO psychologist or psychology practitioner, which that's what I am, does is they assess the situation of the organization in terms of the humans that work there, right? So sometimes you have an IO that goes into human resources. Sometimes you have an IO who goes into human capital management. But you also have IOs who go into talent and development. Uh, you have IOs who go into training. You have IOs who go into people analytics. So what I'm telling you is that an IO psychology practitioner has every tool in the bag that you need when it comes to running an organization for the long term. Because you're catering to your people.
Yeah.
You're trying to understand the people. And to understand the people is how you're going to understand the business. Because people are running the business. People are supporting the business. Stakeholders, those are people, right? And IO loves a good stakeholder management, strategizing, conversation.
Yeah. And with my organizational leadership, we took a lot of organizational behavior classes and psychology classes, and there's huge overlap with IO, with a big focus on leadership, and that's where my interests were in, because the way that our society is run is very hierarchical, right? So like the leader at the top has all the influence, has all the power to impact everyone below. And I've seen some pretty bad leaders, and I've experienced some pretty bad leaders. And I think right now we can see it all over the place on LinkedIn, in politics. Just because you have a title doesn't mean that you're a good leader. And we're going to get into the human psychology aspect of this, and that's why we're starting with psychological safety and why we're big proponents of psychological safety, because that is one way to empower employees and to empower your organization to meet your organizational goals and your metrics and your revenue and all that stuff. But without it, which is what we mostly experience, at least I know on my end, I experienced a lot of not psychological safety, is kind of what drove me to study this, right? And so I think with psychological safety, there's also the misunderstanding that we have to be nice to each other all the time. So how you mentioned earlier, the toxic positivity, or that we have to be nice to each other, or that we're never going to disagree. That's actually not the case. So psychological safety is really building a culture where it's okay to disagree. That if I say something that is not in favor of my supervisor, that I'm not going to get fired, that I'm not going to get put in the corner, that I'm not going to get called out, right? It's having that level of confidence and trust that we can disagree and we can dialogue and everything's going to be okay. It's kind of relationship dynamics, right? But relationship
It is
dynamics
relationship dynamics
at
yeah.
work, which for whatever reason, the line of professionalism often likes to split those into different things, right? So when at work, we call it interpersonal relationships, interpersonal conflict, even though it's that relationship building and trust building that also carries into work. And so that's a clear thing that I think I would want to drive home, is that psychological safety doesn't necessarily mean we are nice to each other all the time, and it's not toxic positivity, but it's that we've developed trust and an environment where I can go to you to bring up bad things, good things, and the relationship is going to stay the same. The dynamic won't change.
Yeah. And it's like, it makes sense that at least workers in the US feel this way. We have this culture of individualism where, in many cases, people see asking for help as a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Especially in the workplace where, as you mentioned before, it's all about performance, right? It's all about that ROI. So once again, it's about reprogramming, de-shedding. It's about telling yourself it's okay to ask for help, reminding yourself that there are people out there who want to help you.
And now to drive the point even more home, we're going to share a couple of examples, right? Because I think one of the way that we'll set up our conversations here is to introduce a topic in a way that makes it practical and understanding for any worker in the workplace as a form of empowerment and self-advocacy, and then also through our lived experience, because that's where I think it'll really help drive the point home. So we're going to share, our experience with psychological safety at work so that it gives you an actual example of what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. So Farra, tell us your story.
As someone who's had many, many jobs as, a right in the middle millennial, 90s baby, what's up? I guess this time around, I'm going to pick, while I was a teacher, while working as a teacher, when I was in public school, yes, I did work in a couple of public schools. I had an administrator come to me and give me some notes that I honestly wasn't expecting to get, given that I didn't have any issues with my students. And what they said to me was, "Hey, I know you. I know who you are, and I know how you are. But can you be a little softer?" And I said, "Excuse me." Softer for who?
What does
exactly?
that even mean?
Yeah, what does that even mean? And as I said, in this case, my clients were my students, and my students had no issues with me. If anything, they were in my room too much. you know? And in the moment when she told me that, I not only did I think to myself, but I could feel like my shoulders tightening, and it was like an automatic kind of defense, which, that's just how my amygdala works.
Mhm.
Uh, and so my breathing became off. It was not as smooth as it was before. And it was like I could feel like a gray cloud moving over me, not staying over me because I don't stay in those things,
Mhm.
but moving over me as she was saying that, simply because, first of all, I was confused as to where this was coming from.
Mhm.
Second of all, I thought this was a safe space. Now I'm taken aback. Now I have to recalibrate. Now I have to restructure myself.
So visceral. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so after that, you know, clearly it wasn't my students, wasn't the parents, it wasn't getting any crazy phone calls or emails. It had to have been my coworkers, the
Mm.
other teachers that had this issue with me. And if we had had psychological safety, they could have just spoken to me. They could have just walked up and said, "Hey, like, why don't you blah blah blah, why don't you, etc." And that would have been cool with me. Direct communication is welcomed,
Mhm.
especially in the workplace.
Mhm.
And I feel like that should be the one place where direct communication is necessary.
Mhm.
You want to be clear and concise so that you can work efficiently and effectively.
Mhm.
So how about you?
I mean, a lot of examples come up, right?
Yeah.
I can think of two examples like that are at the forefront of bad psychological safety and good psychological safety. But since you went with the bad, I'll go with the good. The good example, so that we can
Yeah,
show.
you're lucky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I I have worked with some good people and some inspiring people. I have also worked with people who have bit my head off, and that visceral feeling that you were describing of the cloud moving over your head and just kind of like your shoulders tensing up. I won't share that story today, but the visceral feeling, I remember one time being in a meeting where a boss was just a very not nice lady, very narcissistic, very mean, where I felt attacked and my face was shaking, my heart was racing. Needless to say, like I did not last there a long time because our bodies tell us information. Um, those are all signals of bad psychological safety. I'll focus on the good psychological safety because I actually do have experiences with some people and humans and incredible humans and leaders who really understand, what it's like to work
Love
with
that.
diversity. You mentioned it's kind of like a negative term now, but I'm all about diversity because it's diversity of thought, of processing, of culture, of background, of experience, of knowledge. And in that diversity, there's so much case studies and research on how diversity actually advances innovation and breakthroughs and organization. Like homogeneity is not where it's at. It's very much diversity. And so the example that I have is a medical director that I used to work with. And this was during COVID. So that shit was stressful
Yeah, sounds
during
like a lot.
COVID. We were doing a front line response program for a health program in LA County, and COVID brought on a lot of changes very fast, very quickly, kind of like that pendulum and whiplash that I was talking about earlier. And when leaders have the ability to roll out changes in a way that is very mindful of their staff, it makes the world of a difference. And in this case, this leader was someone who actually recognized that importance of we can't just flip a switch and expect our 300 member team, 300 member team, to like change overnight, right? Like there has to be mechanisms of how we share information and roll things out, especially during COVID, when we were doing, like life-saving interventions. And so there was going to be a big transition, and I myself was in a leadership role, but she was the medical director, and she got to know me. And then I also at that point started sharing more about my processing is different. I'm a slower processor. I need some time to think, to analyze. Like we're all kind of different when it comes to how we process information and make decisions. And I wish that's like something that more people were open to, and more leaders and higher leadership were open to, because people expect fast results and fast things and fast turnaround. And, I found that I'm not like a fast, like I need some time to analyze things. And she saw that. And, for one of the big changes that was going to take place, one day she called me in the afternoon and she gave me a heads up, right? This big thing is coming tomorrow. And tomorrow is still a short time frame. During COVID, like a lot of things were happening rapidly, right? But I've also had managers who expect the response on the spot, who want the thing on the spot, or like an hour or two, or like urgent, etc.
That's crazy.
This was during COVID. It doesn't get any more urgent than COVID, right? But she still figured out how to work with people and how to work with their operating style, right? So she called me and she says, okay, hey, I know you're a cogitator. And a cogitator, which at that point I was like, what's a cogitator? And this is someone who, takes, a person who engages in deep thinking or serious consideration before making a decision. So that's who I am. I'm just very analytical and like to outweigh things. And especially when they're going to impact an entire team of 300 people, like I like to actually think about how we're going to roll things out. And so just that heads up, right? It seems very little. It's not. It's huge. She gave me like this big change is happening tomorrow, and I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out how to roll it out tomorrow. That gave me a time frame. And her approach of understanding and seeing, like it's such a difference. You described a cloud, you described the tense in your body. And for me in that moment, wow, this person sees me. This person understands that I don't process like others. And she didn't make me feel shame for it. She said, I'm going to work with you. I know you're a cogitator. This big thing is happening. Let's see how you roll it out tomorrow. And then she's like, do you want to bounce ideas off of me? Or kind of like, we talked a little more, but that experience working with that medical director was amazing because she just knew how to work with people on various levels in that way. And that's a wild of a difference because, as a leader, being able to promote psychological safety from a medical director who then I was like the operations director, who then had to like, influence the changes across 300 people. That's not an easy thing. So trying to promote psychological safety in that way is huge. And I think that it actually showed in how we did our work. And I can actually compare it to the situations where there was no psychological safety and no consideration for how people take information and how we process things differently.
I love that. We need more leaders like that.
More. Mm-hmm.
Way more. We need less of the dark triad leaders and executives that we have now, and we need more emotionally intelligent people.
Mm-hmm. That's really what it is, emotional intelligence. I feel like that medical director had incredible emotional intelligence. And I don't know if she knew it or just innately, intuitively knew how to do it. But we do have a future episode where we will walk you guys through what emotional intelligence is, because it's a skill that can be developed and improved, and anyone can have emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like she not only saw you, but in seeing you, she felt you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what empathy is.
Yeah.
I know people think of empathy in a lot of ways, but for me, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And empathy is one of the considerations for emotional intelligence is having empathy and developing empathy, because folks sometimes think that I'm not an empathetic person, but that that is a skill that can be developed as well, and it can be practiced. And it starts with that awareness. There's definitely a mode, like modality to kind of develop emotional intelligence.
Oh yeah, it's called the development of it. You can develop cognitive empathy is really what it is. Like some people are just like born with this innate like, oh, I feel you, we feel each other. Others, like most people, to be honest, have to develop the building blocks of that. And developing those building blocks is called cognitive empathy. And everyone is capable of doing it at any age, at any point in their life.
And it's one of those that, along with psychological safety, can really help promote self-advocacy, and just like if you're a leader in organizations, can improve your teams, departments, and organizations. It starts with you, right? Self-leadership and you doing it, but then like a ripple, it can, it can tag on to your team members and other organizational colleagues.
It also takes togetherness because many ripples make waves. For real.
And that's why psychological safety matters a lot. And it's not just, an academic concept. It's lived, it's in the stories, it's in our bodies, and it's in the way that we show up every day.
So now we'll transition into a little bit of science. Let's back some of this stuff up. Let's talk about why psychological safety really, really matters, which we have. And we want to expand on it and make sure that everyone knows that this is not just an academic concept at all. We want to reiterate that as many times as we can because this is a very important topic. So let's talk about Google. Everyone knows them. A lot of people use them. Half of the country hates them. Unless they want to sponsor us. Sponsor us, Google. Hey, what's up?
Shameless plug.
So Google had a Project Aristotle, and essentially their people operations team, which if you're not in the corporate world and you're not in the jargon, the people ops or people operations team is essentially HR plus the people analytics people. So HR and research. They're looking at a lot of data points. So from the inputs of their data engineers and their IOs and a few sociologists, I'm sure, they did a multi-year research project. This project was to try and figure out what makes the best teams, right? Because when you work at Google, everything is team oriented. Not only that, it's globalized team, which, double whammy. That brings in more opportunities for conflicts. So when they launched this in 2012, they gave it a few years, of course, and then they released the results in 2015. Why did they do this? Figure out a good team, yes, but what are the factors of that, right? So, are the teams effective? Are they innovative? Are they coming up with new products, new features, etc.? Are the teams high performing? High performing is kind of subjective, right? I feel like every department has their own definition of this. But for the sake of time, we'll just say high performing teams do good stuff. And they make people happy, right? They make their leaders happy. And so they wanted to see if they could replicate these great teams or the bestest of the best teams. And so what they found after analyzing close to 200 teams, right? It's a lot. So if there's close to 200 teams, there's well over 200 people involved. I would wager to say at least 300 to 400 people involved. And what they saw was that psychological safety was the depending factor that made these teams worked at their best or be the most productive, the the psychological safety, like we talked about earlier, doesn't mean that they were all nice to each other all the time and that they were playing patty cake and keeping things simple. You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? Like innovation comes from conflict. We all know this, right? Because you're bringing out ideas, you're putting them on the table, and not
Mhm.
all ideas are great,
Mhm.
right? Like I know this personally for me. I have a ton of ideas.
Mhm.
Only like 3 of them work sometimes, right?
Yeah. But it's trial and error, right? We have to have that ability
Uh,
to hypothesize and try and see how it works out. Mhm.
yeah. And we need psychological safety to do that.
Mhm.
And we've heard it from Harvard. We've heard it from Google now, so that means you gotta believe us.
Mhm.
Duh. Uh, if Google is saying it, am I right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Some other important factors, of course, dependability, which I could tie back into psychological safety, feeling like you can depend on your teammates, feeling secure in those relationships that you have with people, role clarity, something that the marketers, the engineers, and the law department at Klarna no longer has.
Mhm. Mhm.
that that is super important. Also, like the meaning of your work. So I guess kind of circling way, way back to Maslow and,
Mm.
and his theories of work and how we need to have meaning in it. And also the impact. What is the work doing? And I can say for a fact, after speaking with many people who work at Google, they are all about their impact. They're like, I'm doing great in the world. I'm doing this. I am providing this to so many people. And that's important,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Purpose is important.
Mhm.
And that needs to be embedded into the culture. And how do we do that with psychological safety?
Yeah. And that, your example takes me back to when I first read about psychological safety through Amy Edmondson's research. I think she talks about this in the Fearless organization. But it's how she actually accidentally stumbled on psychological safety. In the research work that she was doing, she describes how she started off her research looking at healthcare teams. And she was looking at error rates across two different healthcare teams. And, you mentioned purpose and impact. Like, when we're talking about purpose and impact in healthcare, like, that's one of, let's talk about high stakes, right? In
Yeah,
healthcare and,
truly.
and dealing with people's lives from a healthcare perspective, right? And so she actually stumbled upon it where when looking at two different teams, um, they had what, from a researcher standpoint, thought like, well, this is a good team and this is a bad team based on the things that she was observing and how they communicated, how they team dynamics played out. So some observational things from the organizational standpoint, right? But what was nice about her study, how she mentions, is that she was working with like lead nurse researchers and doctors who were actually able to look at medical data and look at client records and see where errors went. So she was able to minimize like research bias, right? Like
Hmm.
research bias is when we want to kind of like prove what we're thinking or prove our hypothesis. And so the fact that she didn't really understand the medical aspect for error rates and needed these specialists kind of validated her study even more in that regard. But what was fascinating, and when we get to the phenomena aspect, is that she had the team that she thought was a good team, that she thought was going to have less medical errors, and the team that she thought was a bad team that would have more medical errors. And the surprising thing is that the good team actually had higher medical errors, and the
Of
bad
course they
team
did.
had lower medical errors. And so that's where she was like, okay, Data, what? What's going on here? This is not what I thought was going to happen. And she sent her research assistant out, unbiased, didn't know what the hypothesis was, didn't know what anything of the research questions were. She just sent them out to see, like, what's the difference here from, like, an objective standpoint. And what do you think it was?
Conflict, diversity,
Hmm.
psychological safety.
Yeah.
Uh,
So one of the things that they noticed was that the team, the perceived good team that had higher medical errors were actually more open in talking to each other, in admitting mistakes, in talking about how do we prevent medical errors. There was an air and a trust of figuring out that we know that we did a mistake. We didn't do a medication, we overdosed something, we medical errors.
strategize together.
They actually
Yeah.
looked into, well, how do we prevent this? How do we stop this? And it acknowledges, it forces someone to acknowledge, oops, I made a mistake. Oops, I did this. And then as a team, they figure out, well, how do we prevent this from happening again? Whereas the team with lower medical errors, it's not that they were not having medical errors. And that's when I think they were able to find that out through like chart reviews and all that stuff. They weren't talking to each other. And when we think about like why folks aren't talking to each other and the whole culture of putting your head down, it's that fear aspect, right? People are afraid like, "Ooh, I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm gonna get fired if people find out that I did a incorrect thing and, my medical job, which is pretty serious, like I'm gonna get fired." But that's not the case, right? With psychological safety, it's not supposed to be that fear-based aspect. We don't want you to keep your head down, right? Because that's where like the problems start arising. And so that's, I think, pretty fascinating to have stumbled upon psychological safety in that way and thinking like it's actually how people are interacting. And it's actually the team dynamics and the group culture that promotes psychological safety or not. But it needs to be led by someone.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it weird that I want to say duh?
I mean, it must be duh for us, but clearly it's not duh for a lot of quote leaders out there who are biting their team's heads off, And I've definitely been in situations with bad leaders where it's not a psychologically safe environment, and that's why I left.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've been there. I mean, I can definitely maybe count on at least one hand, all of the hand of leaders who, didn't understand that psychological safety was a necessity and not a luxury in the workplace.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so as we wrap it up here for y'all, we're going to go into practical steps for you in telling whether or not there's psychological safety at work and some moves to help you develop some psychological safety. So from a foundational point, from what we talked about, like in your body somatically, the signals, I think one of the first things that you can do with yourself is, even if you're not the boss, and we're talking about like self-advocacy for yourself, is finding out first and foremost, right? Like, now you know what psychological safety is. Do you experience it at work or do you not? And one way that you can do that is notice and observe. How do you feel in your one-on-ones with your supervisor? How are you feeling in your team meetings and your department meetings? Are you feeling more of the distress signals that we talked about? Or are you feeling more of those comfortable, confident signals that we talked about earlier? And that's information for you, right? That's information in the spectrum of psychological safety. And how is fear showing up? Are you afraid of your job, of your boss, of saying something? Or are you not afraid? And if you're not afraid, that's great, right? And if you have fear in there, that's information for you to look at. And then, what can you do about that? If you notice low psychological safety, maybe you can bring it up to your boss. And I say maybe because fear can be holding you back. Because maybe your boss is someone who's not going to take your input at all. So there's also being mindful, right? We don't want to promote any ideas here that might, impact you negatively. We want you to be mindful of this is information for you to be able to understand the situation and figure out like, yes, there's things you can do, and you also have to be mindful about how you go about it, right? So maybe it is something that you can talk to your boss about. If it's a really bad boss that you don't feel comfortable going to because they are not going to take this well, maybe it's information that you hold for yourself, and then you figure out how else you can self-advocate for your psychological safety. And in future podcasts, I think we'll talk about how information might mean we have to leave our jobs. Not right now, though. Right now, we're going to start it with psychological safety and that information for you, right? Something that you notice. And then if it's something that you want to see improved, again, maybe there's a boss that you can talk to, a supervisor, HR, maybe there's anonymous culture assessment, climate surveys, whatever they call them, that you can, be candid in. But to start off, it's noticing and it's having choice, even if you're lower on the spectrum of psychological safety. Having that awareness is how you start off with, what do I do from here? And then Farra, maybe you can give us some of the quick moves of what it can actually look like, some examples.
Definitely. But first, I want to say I like how you pointed out the caution, because there are a lot of toxic bosses out there. There are a lot of toxic managers who take things personally, even though we are in a business environment. And we have to be mindful that not everybody has the same capacity as we do in these situations. So thank you for pointing that out, Miriam. So here are some quick moves for you if you were feeling the feels, needing some psychological safety. Invite input before giving your opinion. So an example would be, I'd love to hear your ideas before I share mine, kind of a thing, right? So what are you thinking about this project? Or what are your thoughts on this report, Number 2, you can respond with curiosity instead of judgment, which honestly, this comes up a lot. This came up at an ATD event that I went to yesterday. Respond with curiosity instead of judgment. Don't be afraid to ask why. Number 3, model admitting mistakes. As a leader, it's up to you. It's up to you, right? Show that you're a human. Display your humanity in front of your team. That will help instill psychological safety, no doubt.
And we'd love to know if you who are listening to this podcast have experienced good or bad psychological safety, or maybe you learned something from what we had to share today. We'd love to hear from you. We're adding a listener form into the podcast show notes. So just click on that link and let us know. We want to hear from you and incorporate you into the show. I think the more that we can bring in real lived experience stories beyond Farra, beyond myself, this is really a supportive space to bridge the organizational psychology into what we're actually seeing and experiencing at work, and to let you know that you're not alone out there with the toxic bosses and the bad organizations. Like, they need to improve their game. And we're gonna share some tips and tricks on how to improve organizations in this show.
Definitely. And I want to reiterate that this is a community initiative. So we mean it when we say we want to hear from y'all. We want to hear your stories, because it is in the stories that we weave that togetherness, right? That understanding and the human experience that we have. So make sure y'all fill that out. Make sure y'all find us on LinkedIn, drop us a DM,
And we're looking forward to connecting. And with that, we'll let you all go. But before that, we're gonna ask you guys to follow, like, subscribe. Burnout Meets Thriving, our new podcast show hosts with Farra and Miriam. Thank you for listening today.
Yeah, also you can find us at our websites. For me, that's going to be burnoutsupportsociety.com. And you guys can find Miriam at thrivinghuman.life. And we can't wait to hear from you.
And tune in for the next one.